The desert wind carried dust and gunpowder the way some places carried prayer. It clung to every breath, every heartbeat, and every memory Elizabeth Carraway ever had of home. Her father, Samuel Carraway, was known across the New Mexico territory as the Apache hunter. His name alone could stir a saloon into whispers. Folks said he'd tracked more Apaches than any man alive, earning bounty and blood in equal measure. To Liza, he was both a hero and a stranger, a man with hard hands, colder eyes, and a heart carved by the frontier. Their ranch sat on the edge of the Red Hills, where the desert began to hum at sunset. Every evening, her brothers cleaned their rifles and polished the knives, preparing for the next hunt. The walls of the cabin were lined with trophies, not animal skulls but tokens, silver bracelets, eagle feathers, beaded belts taken from fallen warriors. Liza had been raised to see them as symbols of triumph, but lately they made her chest ache. At 18, she was the quiet one, the painter, the dreamer. She didn't ride like her brothers or shoot like her father. She watched. She sketched. She saw the small things no one else noticed. The sorrow in her father's eyes when he thought no one was looking. The tremor in her brother Jacob's hands when he cleaned his rifle after a kill. Her mother had died years before, and with her went the warmth in the Carraway house. Now the only fire left burned in her father's obsession to bring down Taza, the Apache the bounty posters called the Ghost of the Red Mesa. He had earned that name through myth and fear. They said he rode alone, never spoke to white men, and moved through the desert like a shadow. Samuel claimed Taza was responsible for every wagon raid, every ranch burning between Tucson and Fort Wingate. He was certain that killing the Ghost Apache would be his last, greatest triumph, the deed that would make the Carraway name legendary. But Liza had heard other stories whispered by traders and passing soldiers. They said Taza wasn't a bandit but a protector, a man avenging his slaughtered people after the army raided their camp by mistake. They said he had once been a chief's son, educated, even kind, until vengeance took his soul. That night, Liza sat on the porch, sketching the outline of the mountains against the dying light. The air smelled of sage and smoke. Her father's men were loading ammunition. She could hear the metallic clatter and the low murmur of plans being made. "Tomorrow we ride south," her father said, stepping into the amber light. "Word is Taza's been seen near Salt Ridge. This time we'll end it." Jacob grinned, but his smile was thin. Liza looked up from her sketchbook. "Pa," she said softly, what if he's not the monster you think?" The old man froze. His jaw tightened. "You think too much, girl. The desert don't care about your questions. You kill or you die." "I just wonder," she continued, voice trembling, "how many times we've said that before." Her father didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his boots striking hard against the wooden planks. Liza stared down at her drawing, the silhouette of a man on horseback, faceless, distant, riding into the sunset. She had drawn him without meaning to. The Ghost Apache, the man her family swore to destroy. As the night deepened, coyotes howled in the canyons. The sound rose like a mournful hymn. She closed her sketchbook and looked toward the dark horizon where her father would ride come dawn. Somewhere out there, beneath the same sky, the Ghost Apache was alive, breathing, watching, maybe even listening, and though she couldn't explain it, Liza felt a strange certainty settle in her heart. Before this hunt ended, their paths would cross. Not as hunter and hunted, but as two lives bound by the same desert, the same pain, and a fate neither of them could escape. The sun bled across the desert in shades of gold and red as the Carraway party rode south toward Salt Ridge. Heat shimmered on the horizon, distorting the world into a wavering mirage of rock and sky. To Liza, the desert always seemed alive, whispering secrets in the wind, humming beneath her horse's hooves. Her father rode at the front, straight-backed and grim, his rifle slung across his saddle. Jacob and the other men followed close, their eyes sharp and restless. Liza rode at the rear, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. She had begged to come, claiming she could help spot Apache tracks. The truth was simpler. She wanted to see for herself what kind of man this Taza truly was. By midday, they reached the dry riverbed that wound through Salt Ridge. The air was still, too still, as if the land itself held its breath. Liza dismounted and crouched near the sand, running her fingers through the fine dust. Her brother Jacob joined her, his face slick with sweat. "Pa says he was sighted near here," Jacob whispered. "Says Taza travels alone now. Makes him harder to catch." Liza nodded, staring at a single boot print half buried near a rock. It wasn't one of theirs. The print was narrow, deep, deliberate. Someone had been here recently. Her father signaled for silence. The men spread out, moving like ghosts between the rocks. The only sound was the faint rattle of wind through dry brush. Then a flicker, movement among the shadows. Liza froze. A shape emerged from behind a boulder, moving with fluid precision. A tall figure, bare-chested, skin painted with ash and dust, his hair bound with a strip of leather. He carried no gun, only a long knife and a bow across his back. Taza. Her father's whisper cut the air. Take him alive. But before the riflemen could raise their barrels, Taza moved, impossibly fast. He leapt from the rocks, landing in a swirl of dust, and a sudden cry went up as he knocked one man's weapon away. A bullet cracked, missed. Another and missed again. He was already gone, vanishing behind the ridge. The men gave chase. Liza hesitated only a heartbeat before following. The world blurred, shouting gunfire, hooves striking stone. She reached the top of the ridge and gasped. Below her lay a narrow canyon, a flash of movement, chaos. Taza darted between rocks like a spirit, his bow singing. One of her father's men fell with an arrow in his leg, not his heart. Another was disarmed and left crawling. Liza couldn't look away. There was no cruelty in his movements, no madness, only control. He wasn't killing for sport. He was surviving. Then she saw it. The moment everything changed. Her father cornered Taza near a sandstone ledge, rifle raised. Taza's back was to the drop. "Drop your weapon, savage," Samuel shouted. "You're worth more alive." Taza said nothing. His gaze flicked upward, and in that instant the air itself seemed to split open with grief. A cry rang out from behind him. Another Apache warrior, younger, reckless, charging to help. A gunshot thundered. The young man fell before he reached the ledge. Liza's breath caught. Taza knelt beside the fallen body, touching the man's hair, whispering something she couldn't hear. Then he looked up, and his eyes found hers across the canyon. The world seemed to still. There was no hate in his gaze, no savagery, only pain, ancient and raw. It pierced through her like a knife. Before anyone could fire again, Taza rose, flung a handful of dust into the wind, and vanished into the red haze of the canyon. Her father cursed, ordering the men to follow, but Taza was already gone, like smoke, like a ghost. That night, as the campfire crackled beneath a bruised sky, Liza couldn't sleep. She sat apart from the others, her sketchbook open in her lap. By the light of the fire, her pencil moved without thought, tracing the strong lines of a man's face, the sadness in his eyes, the ghost Apache. For the first time, she wasn't sure who the hunted truly was and who the monster might be. The sun rose red and hot over Salt Ridge, casting long shadows across the jagged cliffs and dry riverbeds. Elizabeth Carraway's heart pounded in her chest as she crested the ridge, her eyes scanning the canyon below. The day before she had seen him, Taza, the ghost Apache, vanish like smoke into the desert. She should have felt fear, maybe relief, but all she felt was an ache she didn't understand. Her father and brothers were already below, setting up positions along the canyon edges. The plan was simple: corner Taza, force him into the open, capture him alive. Samuel Carraway's reputation demanded it, and yet as Liza watched her father move, rifle steady, she couldn't ignore the tension that twisted her stomach. The first shot rang out, a warning, or the beginning of the hunt. Liza flinched as her brother Jacob fired again, aiming for a distant shadow. Taza emerged as silent and precise as always, moving between rocks and dust, arrows in hand, a ghost among men. Liza's breath caught. She recognized him instantly. The same posture, the same careful, measured steps. But today she saw something else, desperation. The ghost Apache's face was drawn tight, eyes dark with grief. One of his own, a young warrior barely older than Jacob, had fallen in the crossfire. Her father shouted orders, rallying his men. "Push him down into the canyon. Don't let him escape." The echo of gunfire and shouting filled the air. Liza's hands shook as she clutched her sketchbook to her chest. She had come to witness him, to understand, but what she saw made her stomach twist. Taza's fury was not mindless. He fought to protect, not to kill. He spared men who could have been his death, And in that moment she felt a strange connection, as though she could see his pain mirrored in her own. A sudden arrow flew past her ear, and Liza ducked instinctively. Dust clouded her vision. Below, a skirmish unfolded, her father's men advancing, Taza darting from rock to rock. Then, with impossible speed, he disarmed one of her brothers, leaving him scrambling in the dirt. Another soldier fired, and the bullet struck one of Taza's companions, a man who had only seconds before tried to protect his friend. The young Apache fell with a cry that tore at Liza's chest. Her father cursed, fury burning in his eyes. "Take him! For God's sake, take him alive." From the ridge, Liza could see the full measure of Taza's skill. He didn't fight like a common bandit. He fought like a man protecting what was his. Not just his life, but his honor, his people, his brotherhood. Each movement was precise, economical, almost balletic. And yet there was a cost. Blood soaked the rocks, echoing in the canyon like a mournful hymn. Then it happened. Their eyes met. Across the distance, a silent recognition passed between them. Taza looked straight at her, not with anger, not with malice, but with a sorrow so deep it almost hurt to look. Liza's chest tightened, her throat dry. The man she had been taught to hate, the ghost Apache her father swore was a murderer, looked at her. And for the briefest heartbeat, the world fell away. She felt it then, a pull she didn't understand. Empathy, fear, fascination, all of it. And as the men clashed below, she realized the truth she had been denying. Taza was not a monster. He was a man, a warrior, and in his grief, in his restraint, he was more human than any of them. Her father fired again, narrowly missing. Taza moved like wind, and just as suddenly he vanished. Dust rose where he had been, curling into the air before disappearing. Liza sank to her knees on the ridge, heart pounding. The caraway men shouted, guns raised, but it was too late. Taza had disappeared into the maze of canyons, leaving nothing behind but silence and blood. Liza picked up her sketchbook. She began to draw not the hunt, not the violence, but the man, the ghost Apache, standing over his fallen companion, the grief in his eyes more piercing than any bullet. She didn't yet know how their paths would cross again, but for the first time she felt it. The hunted man was not just her father's prey. He was someone she could not turn away from, no matter how hard she tried, and somewhere deep in the desert, she knew he had noticed her too. Night fell like a dark velvet curtain over the desert, and the Caraway camp settled into uneasy quiet. Elizabeth Caraway sat by the fire, sketchbook open, trying to capture the jagged outline of Salt Ridge under the moonlight. But sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed the day's hunt, the blood, the cries, the ghost Apache's sorrowful eyes meeting hers across the canyon. She tried to shake the thoughts away, telling herself she should fear him, the man her father called a monster, yet every instinct screamed otherwise. She felt drawn. The desert was treacherous at night, a dangerous place even for those who knew its rhythms. Liza knew this all too well when, several miles from camp, a band of outlaws attacked while she fetched water for the horses. She had thought she was alone, safe under the moon, when rough hands grabbed her and dragged her from the path. "Quiet," one hissed, pressing a knife against her ribs. "Move or we kill you." Panic flared, but Liza forced herself to breathe. She tugged at the knife, twisted and kicked, but 2 against 1 were odds she could not overcome. A rough shove sent her sprawling to the ground, the coarse desert dirt scraping her palms. A sudden shadow swept over the scene. A low growl, a movement faster than her eyes could follow. One of the bandits went flying, landing in a cloud of dust. Another staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. Then he was there. Tall, silent, and impossibly precise, Taza emerged from the darkness like the spirit of the desert itself. He carried no gun, only his knife and the quiet authority of a man who needed no words to command fear. In seconds, the bandits were disarmed, bruised, or fleeing. Liza, frozen in awe, could barely comprehend what she saw. The ghost Apache knelt beside her, his dark eyes scanning her for injury. His hands were gentle as they lifted her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" His voice was soft, unexpectedly melodic, with an accent shaped by the canyon winds and desert silence. I think I'm fine," she stammered, brushing dust from her skirts. Her heart raced, not from fear but from the nearness of him, the same man her family had sworn to kill. "You should not be here alone," he said, standing and offering her his arm. "The desert is not kind to those who wander without protection." She looked up at him, taking in his lean frame, the sharp lines of his face, the firelight glinting off his knife. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but no words would come. Instead, she nodded, allowing him to guide her away from the open canyon toward a hidden canyon he clearly knew well. The path was narrow and treacherous, winding between rocks and scrub. He moved silently, confidently, as if the desert itself obeyed him. Liza stumbled at times, but his hands caught hers, steadying her with a careful tenderness that made her stomach tighten. By the time they reached a sheltered alcove, the moon was high, bathing the rocks in silver light. Taza offered her water from a small leather pouch and tended to a scrape on her arm with herbs he carried. She flinched at first, but his touch was careful, measured. "You could have died," he murmured almost to himself. "You are brave. Or foolish." Liza swallowed. She wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize for everything her family had done, but the words faltered, trapped in her throat. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a ghost, not a savage, but a man. A protector. A stranger who had saved her life when no one else could. For the first time, the desert felt less lonely. For the first time, she felt that maybe, the first light of dawn seeped into the hidden canyon, casting jagged shadows on the rocks where Elizabeth Carraway had spent the night. The desert was alive in ways she could almost hear, the soft rustle of lizards across stone, the whisper of wind through the crevices, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead, and through it all Taza sat nearby, sharpening his knife with the precision of a man who had long since learned the language of patience and danger. Liza stirred beneath the blanket he had provided, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her arm, still, throbbed where the bandits had grazed her skin, a sharp reminder of how close she had come to death. But more than the physical ache, it was the memory of Taza's presence, the calm strength of him, the quiet authority in his gaze, that unsettled her heart. "You will be all right," he said, not looking up from his work. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of desert wind and distant mountains. "The scrape is shallow, nothing that will keep you from moving. But the mind is a different wound." She watched him, captivated despite herself. You saved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" He paused, knife in hand, and finally met her gaze. The dark eyes she had glimpsed across the canyon were the same now, solemn, piercing, alive with something she couldn't name. "Because it was right," he said simply. "Because you did not deserve what they would have done. Because—" He trailed off, and the words hung in the cool morning air. She felt heat creep into her cheeks. His pause was heavier than any sentence, filled with intent and meaning she wasn't yet ready to understand. She turned her gaze away, embarrassed by the way her pulse raced. The morning passed slowly. Taza moved through the canyon with the ease of one born to the desert, showing her how to find water in the cacti, how to listen to the shifting winds to sense approaching danger, how to move quietly over stone and sand. Liza absorbed it all, marveling at his skill and the effortless grace with which he navigated the world she had been taught to fear. At midday, they stopped to rest near a small pool of water. Taza knelt by the edge, cupping the clear liquid in his hands, offering it first to her. Liza drank, her reflection shimmering in the pool alongside his. For a moment she could see nothing but the man who had saved her life, who had spared her in a world where others would have let her die. "You fear your family," he said without looking up. "You do not understand them yet, but you feel their intentions. You are torn between loyalty and truth." She nodded. He was right, and it surprised her how deeply he understood her heart without needing to pry. I don't know where I belong anymore," she confessed, the words falling like stones into the still water. Taza finally turned to her, kneeling beside her. "You belong where you live with your conscience," he said, voice quiet, measured. "You will find the place where right and heart meet, but until then you are safe here." And in that safety, Liza allowed herself a small, dangerous trust. She rested her head against the rock, listening to the faint whisper of the wind, feeling the warmth of the fire he had built last night. She knew the world outside was harsh, violent, and unforgiving. But in that canyon, under the watch of a man she had been taught to fear, she felt the beginnings of hope. It was a fragile hope, tender and uncertain, but it was enough. The ghost Apache, her family's most wanted, was no longer a specter of fear. He was a guardian, a teacher, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen mercy. And, as the fire crackled beside them, casting dancing shadows across the canyon walls, Liza realized that the bond between them, however quiet and unspoken, had begun to take root. And it would change everything. The desert stretched out endlessly, a sea of red rock and shifting sand, but Elizabeth Carraway felt every inch of it pressing against her chest. She had spent days hidden in the canyon with Taza, the ghost Apache, learning his ways, drinking from cacti and listening to the whispers of the wind. He had saved her life, taught her survival, and in that time she had begun to see the man behind the legend, a man not of cruelty, but of honor and grief. Yet the world outside the canyon still awaited, a world of gunfire, bounty, and her father's unyielding pursuit. Samuel Carraway was not a man to forgive what he perceived as betrayal, and Liza knew that returning home would mean walking into judgment. And yet, she could not remain hidden forever. Her heart was torn between the family she had been raised to obey, and the man who had shown her mercy, who had protected her when no one else could. "I should go," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the wind as she knelt by the pool of water. Taza paused, his knife still in hand, and studied her with eyes like dark coals, unreadable but sharp. "You can go," he said finally, his tone even, almost resigned. "But know this. The desert will remember your footprints, and so will I. Once you leave, nothing will be the same." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her blanket, the one he had given her to sleep on. I must return," she said, though the words felt like chains. "My family, they will be searching. I cannot let them think I've disappeared. They will come for you, Taza, and I cannot let that happen." He didn't argue. Instead, he motioned toward a narrow canyon path she hadn't noticed before. "I will take you to the edge," he said. "When you reach the river, you will be near home. But be careful. Your father's men ride fast, and his anger is sharp." They rode in silence, the desert stretching like a barren ocean on either side. Liza clung to the reins, her thoughts a whirlwind. She felt the pull of two worlds, the one she had been born into, defined by guns, bounties, and duty, and the one Taza inhabited, alive with survival, honor, and an unspoken humanity. She did not yet know which world she belonged to, or if she even had a place in either. When they reached the riverbank, the moonlight shimmering across the water, Taza stopped. His expression was solemn, unreadable. "You will be safe here," he said. "Go. Return to your world, and do what you must." Liza dismounted slowly, her hands trembling. "I thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She wanted to say more, about what she felt, about the pull between them, but the desert swallowed her courage. He nodded once, silent and grave. Then, with a sudden fluid motion, he vanished back into the shadows of the canyon. The journey back home was quiet, the river reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. Liza's mind raced. When she finally approached the Carraway ranch, the firelight of the cabin flickered in the distance, and she knew she was walking into judgment. Her father would demand answers. Her brothers would glare with suspicion. She was alone, carrying secrets that could set her family against her, and put Taza in even greater danger. As she crossed the threshold, the smell of smoke and stew, of leather and horses, enveloped her. Her father's eyes narrowed the instant he saw her. "Where have you been?" Samuel demanded, his voice sharp as a rifle crack. I was fetching water," she said, heart hammering. I got lost." Her father didn't believe her, and she knew he never would, yet for all the fear in her chest, a small ember of defiance burned within her. She had seen Taza, felt his mercy, and experienced a world outside the rigid confines of her family's rules. She was no longer just a caraway daughter. She had glimpsed freedom, honor, and compassion in a place her father could never understand. And though she returned to the family she loved, even as they looked at her with suspicion, she knew that her heart belonged elsewhere, between two worlds, caught between the life she was born into and the life she had discovered in the shadow of the ghost Apache. The desert was no longer just a landscape to Elizabeth Caraway. It had become a memory she carried in every step, every breath. Even as she returned to the Caraway Ranch, the echoes of Taza's presence haunted her. She could see him in the shadows of the hills, hear his whispered warnings in the wind, feel the ghost of his touch on her arm where he had tended her wounds. Yet the desert was no longer hers to roam. She had returned to a world of suspicion, orders, and the unyielding eyes of her father. Samuel Caraway was furious. "Liza," he barked, pacing the cabin, "you rode into danger where no girl should ever go. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've put us all at risk. I only," she started, but the words faltered. How could she explain that it was Taza who had saved her, the same man her father was hunting with deadly intent? How could she justify the mercy of the ghost Apache without inviting her father's wrath? Her father's eyes darkened. "Enough, you will obey us. You are Caraway blood. We do not question what is necessary." Liza lowered her gaze. She could not betray him, not yet, not with her life and his at stake. But every night, as she lay beneath the hard beams of the cabin ceiling, she felt the desert's pull. She remembered Taza's hands, the firelight in his eyes, and the quiet honor in every calculated movement. He had saved her, protected her, and in doing so, had shown her a truth her family could never teach: that life, even in the harshest desert, could hold mercy. Meanwhile, Taza moved silently among the mesas, tracking the Caraway men who had dared invade his land. The bounty hunter's arrogance had cost lives before, and he would not allow them to strike again. He had learned patience in the shadow of every wrong inflicted upon his people, and now patience gave way to strategy. Rumors reached Liza through traders and wandering shepherds. The ghost Apache had struck again. Horses missing, supplies gone, men found disarmed and left unharmed but terrified. Every story carried the same refrain. The man they hunted was no monster, but a force of nature, and he was not to be underestimated. When her father announced yet another expedition to finally capture Taza, Liza's chest tightened. She knew what lay ahead. Her father was determined, reckless in his honor, and blind to the desert's truth. Her brothers were eager, adrenaline and pride mixing in their veins, and somewhere out there Taza would see their approach. "I cannot let this happen," she whispered to herself, the words trembling with fear and resolve. She remembered the night he had saved her, the gentleness of his hands, the way he had moved like wind through rocks, like water around stones. She could not allow her family to bring death where he had shown mercy. The morning came, red and blazing, as Liza mounted her horse with quiet determination. She would ride into the desert, not as a daughter obeying her father, not as a girl caught between two worlds, but as a bridge between them. She would warn Taza. She would try to prevent bloodshed. She did not yet know what her role would be in the coming storm, but she knew she could no longer remain silent. As the Caraway men rode out, oblivious to her silent resolve, Liza's eyes scanned the mesas, the canyons, the endless desert that had become both prison and sanctuary. Somewhere the ghost Apache watched, somewhere he waited, and somewhere destiny, unforgiving and relentless, was preparing to intertwine their fates once more. The price of honor, she realized, was never simple, and now she was about to pay it with courage, truth, and the risk of everything she had ever known. The sun dipped low behind the red mesas. spilling molten gold across the desert as Elizabeth Carraway rode faster than she ever had before. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. Ahead lay the canyon where Taza's warriors waited, and behind her father's men, relentless, proud, and armed with guns and vengeance. Liza knew she had to reach Taza before blood was shed. Every second counted. The Carraway expedition had underestimated the desert. Rocks shifted beneath horses' hooves, sand clung to every leather strap, and the wind carried warnings Liza could almost hear. She urged her horse forward, eyes scanning the jagged ridges and shadows for any sign of the ghost Apache. Finally, she spotted movement, a flash of shadow between the rocks. Taza. He crouched low, his dark eyes scanning, alert to every whisper of motion. For a heartbeat, she simply watched him, marveling at his effortless command of the terrain. He had become part of the desert itself, moving like wind over stone. "Stop," she called, voice cracking as she drew closer. The horses stumbled, the Carraway men behind her tightening their grip on reins and rifles. "Taza, wait! Don't fight!" Taza's gaze lifted. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He crouched, assessing, calculating. Then he leapt down into the canyon, disappearing behind a boulder with fluid precision. Liza followed the narrow path weaving between rocks, heart in her throat. Below, the clash had already begun. Her father's men had cornered two of Taza's warriors near a ridge. Arrows and bullets tore the air, and dust and smoke swirled in chaotic clouds. The sound of men shouting, horses neighing, and arrows whistling was deafening. Liza's stomach churned. She had not anticipated the brutality of confrontation, nor how quickly it escalated once pride and vengeance took hold. "Stop this," she screamed, throwing herself between the combatants as a rifle discharged, narrowly missing her shoulder. Every instinct told her to flee, yet she planted her feet, raising her arms to halt the fighting. "Please, you are killing each other," her father's voice boomed. "Get out of the way, girl." "Stand aside." "I will not," she cried, voice raw. "This is not honor. You are killing him, and he has spared us." Time slowed. Across the chaos, Taza's eyes found hers again. There was recognition, relief, and something unspoken. Trust. In that instant, she knew she held the power to stop the fight. Her father's pride, her brother's fury, Taza's warrior's instinct for vengeance, all of it hinged on her next move. A gunshot rang out. Jacob stumbled, a bullet grazing him. Liza screamed and lunged forward. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of her father, arms raised. The bullet struck her shoulder, spinning her slightly. She felt the fire of pain shoot through her, but she didn't fall. Taza was there in a heartbeat, catching her, steadying her in his arms. "Liza," he hissed, scanning the canyon for danger. His warriors froze, uncertain, watching the fragile figure in his arms. Her father's men faltered, confusion and fear breaking through their aggression. Liza gasped, her shoulder bleeding, but she lifted her chin. "Stop, enough," she cried. "All of you. This ends now." The desert seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, cautiously, the men lowered their weapons. Taza's warriors relaxed, though arrows remained in hands, ready. Her father's rifle dropped with a clatter, his chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, silence fell over the canyon. The golden light of dusk spilled over the chaos, painting it in warmth and shadows. In that silence, the impossible had happened. The battle had ceased. Blood had not yet claimed more victims, and Liza realized, trembling in Taza's arms, that her courage had saved them all. The ghost Apache, the hunted man, the legend of the desert, looked down at her, and in the shadows of his gaze, she saw gratitude, respect, and something deeper. And in that canyon at dusk between two worlds, Elizabeth Carraway understood that destiny had shifted forever. The canyon was quiet now. the echoes of battle fading into the warm desert twilight. Elizabeth Carraway's shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, but she hardly noticed the pain. Her pulse was focused on Taza, the ghost Apache standing before her with the weight of the desert and its mysteries in his eyes. Around them, her father's men and Taza's warriors lingered tensely, unsure how to proceed but respecting the fragile truce she had enforced. Her father, Samuel Carraway, stood a few paces away, his face pale and hard, pride and fury battling in his gaze. He had seen Liza throw herself into harm's way, seen Taza hold her safe in his arms, and something in him had shifted. He did not lower his rifle completely, but he did not fire again. He watched, rigid and silent, as the two lives he had thought at odds hovered in a tenuous balance. Taza's warriors, their bows still in hand, murmured among themselves. They knew the woman who had crossed the desert with such courage belonged to neither world fully, yet she had acted as mediator, stopping bloodshed with nothing but her voice and her bravery. They respected her, though she remained fragile, human, mortal. Liza swallowed, feeling the weight of every gaze. She stepped forward, her legs trembling. "Taza," she said softly, "please, let there be no more death. We've seen enough. My father, my family, they cannot follow you forever. And I cannot bear to lose anyone else. Not my family, not your people." Taza's dark eyes studied her, measuring her courage and resolve. He knew the choice he faced was heavy. Let her return to her family and risk future conflict, or claim her safety and heart as his own, bridging the worlds that had long been enemies. In every moment he had encountered her, he had seen a rare truth, someone who could see beyond fear, beyond hatred, to the soul of a man. Finally he spoke, voice low and deliberate. "You should not have come here. You risked everything, your life, their wrath." His gaze softened. "But I cannot forget your courage, your heart. You are of two worlds, yet you belong fully to neither. The desert will claim many, but not you." Liza's chest tightened. She had expected him to command her, to insist, to make the decision for her. But instead he offered her choice. She realized that he trusted her judgment as much as she now trusted his. I don't know what to do," she admitted. "If I return to my family, they will never forgive me for what I've done. But if I stay with you, I could be hunted forever. I don't know where I belong." Taza stepped closer, careful, not threatening. "Then you must choose. Not because of me, not because of them, but because of your heart. What is right cannot be dictated by blood or fear." Her father cleared his throat, voice rough with emotion. "Elizabeth?" he began, but she shook her head. This was no longer his decision. This was hers. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying dust, sand, and the ghosts of battles past. Liza closed her eyes, listening to the pulse of the land, the rhythm of life and death, mercy and honor. And in that silence, clarity came. I stay," she said, voice steady. "I stay with you, not as a captive, not as a prize, but because I choose it. Because I cannot turn away from the truth I have seen, from the man who saved me, from the life I have glimpsed in this place." Taza's expression remained unreadable for a moment, then softened into the faintest curve of approval. He extended his hand and she took it, feeling warmth and promise pass between them. The desert held them in its quiet embrace, no longer merely a battleground, but a place where choice, courage, and love could coexist. Her father's men lowered their weapons, hesitant but alive, and the Apache warriors relaxed, bowstrings easing in their hands. Liza had ended the cycle of vengeance, for now the choice had been made. And with it, two worlds began to converge, fragile and uncertain, yet filled with possibility. The sun rose over the red mesas, painting the desert in shades of fire and gold. Elizabeth Carraway stood at the edge of the canyon, the wind tugging at her hair, dust clinging to her skirts. She felt the desert's vastness around her, and yet for the first time it felt like home. The man who had haunted her thoughts, the ghost Apache, stood nearby, silent, strong, and patient, waiting for her not as a master or a captor, but as an equal. Taza had guided her through the dangers of the desert, protected her when her own family could not, and shown her a world of honor, courage, and mercy. Now, in the quiet of dawn, there was only the hum of wind and the faint rustle of desert brush. The canyon had witnessed their trials, their fears, and now it would witness the beginning of a new life. Elizabeth stepped forward, her hand brushing against his. I am ready, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. I choose this life, not because it is easy, not because it is safe, but because it is true. Taza's dark eyes softened, the weight of countless battles and years of solitude giving way to something fragile, yet powerful. Then you will walk with me, Elizabeth. Not as a prisoner, not as someone rescued, but as my partner. We will face the desert together side by side. Her heart swelled. She had imagined this moment countless times, each vision fraught with doubt, danger, and longing. But now, seeing him here, steady and real, she understood the depth of the bond they had forged, born not from fear or obligation, but from trust and shared courage. Her father and brothers appeared on the ridge above, distant but watching. Samuel Carraway's face was unreadable. Pride, fear, and anger warred behind his eyes. He had come to reclaim his daughter, yet as he saw her standing there, confident, determined, and unafraid, he knew he could not. The desert had changed her, and she had chosen her path. Be safe, Samuel muttered finally, his voice low, carrying the weight of grudging respect. And may the desert keep you both alive. Liza nodded once, not turning her back on her family entirely, but acknowledging the reality of the life she had chosen. Her heart was split, yet whole, tethered both to the past and to the life she now embraced. Taza extended his hand again, and she took it. Together they moved deeper into the canyon, the wind carrying the echoes of battles past, the cries of vengeance silenced, replaced now with the soft murmur of hope. The desert tested them endlessly in the days that followed. Sandstorms whipped across the mesas, scorching sun beat upon their backs, and nights were filled with the chill of wind cutting through canyon crevices. But they endured as partners, as equals, and as two hearts intertwined by shared experience. Elizabeth learned to ride like the wind, to track water and shelter, to move silently through the brush, her fear replaced by a steady confidence that came from survival and trust. Taza, too, found change within himself. He had been a man of shadows, of vengeance and solitude, but Elizabeth's presence softened the edges of his life. Her courage, her laughter, her tenderness had brought him a new kind of strength, the kind that did not require blood to prove worth. One evening, under a sky lit with stars so bright it seemed the heavens themselves had descended into the canyon, Taza led Elizabeth to a plateau overlooking the endless desert. He knelt, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. Elizabeth, he said, voice low and reverent, will you walk with me always as my wife, my equal, my companion? Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. Yes, Taza, I will. The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of sage and sand, of freedom and promise. The desert, once a place of fear and battle, now held the story of love, courage, and choice. Elizabeth Carraway, the daughter of hunters, had found her place not between two worlds but within the life she had chosen, bound forever to the ghost Apache who had saved her. And as the stars shimmered above, the desert whispered its approval. The hunted had become the protector. The hunter's daughter had become his bride. Together they would face the endless horizon, fearless and united. The story of the ghost Apache and Elizabeth Carraway had reached its beginning, not its end.